Chapter 3. Sandfor, a male elf, roughly 7 feet tall, with pointy needle-like ears that were especially sharp and razor-like even by elven standards, lied in a small cell made of magical willow wood. He wasn't lying directly on the floor of the cell, but there was a small bed of Thanksgiving-colored magical willow leaves on the ground, and these leaves were serving the function of a cot for him. A cot of rot, so to speak, since these leaves were in a state of November or a magical willow leaf decomposition. There theoretically would have been a legitimate cot in his cell if it were not for the fact that there wasn't. If you didn't already guess, Sandfor was an elf jail, and if you didn't already guess, elf jail was in a giant willow tree because the elves lived in a big gay elf forest. At least the elves whom Sandfor associated with, his compatriots. And this is gay as in jolly, of course, though many elves enjoyed having sex with those of the same gender, and could be described using the human non-fantasy word homosexual. For humans, homosexuality was a sexual orientation generally practiced by the rich, powerful, and artistically inclined, at least in the New Jersey area where Newark and West Orange existed. In other areas like East Africa and Persia, homosexuality was illegal, with sex between people of the same gender prohibited, an absurd victimless crime enforced by oppressive governments that were looking to screw with people just to be dicks. Homosexuals rebelled against these evil, oppressive governments, generally by forming vast guerrilla armies and committing countless atrocities against those who tried to screw with them, often hacking off limbs of prisoners and massacring villages worth of civilians on a regular basis. Homosexuality was common among elves, who viewed it with the same enthusiasm they viewed buttered toast. But Sandfor was very much a heterosexual elf, inasmuch as heterosexuality could be defined as a person being sexually attracted to another person of the opposite gender. This definition is of course assuming a binary gender system, with men being the opposite of women, women being those who carry children in the reproductive process, and give birth, unlike men who just spread their seed. Even though heterosexuality was also common among elves, who viewed it similarly to the way they viewed pop music and ice water, Sandfor's heterosexuality had not been good to him in particular, alas. It had actually landed him in metaphorical hot water, with the charge of rape. Elves, who often lived thousands of years, were very protective of their children, whom they arbitrarily defined as those under 120 years of age. This was in spite of the fact that elves matured at about the same rate as humans, who lived much shorter lives, often dying around 85 if they got good health care. The age of consent for elves was slightly lower than the age of emancipation, being only 100. Having sex with an elf below 100 years of age, if you were an elf older than 100 years of age, was legally considered a form of rape, as bad as any other forcible rape, since elves under the age of 100 were not able to consent to sex under the law. The age of consent in New Jersey was roughly 16, but given the observable maturity of the area's decidedly human denizens, it probably should have been 32, with procreation permanently banned. As far as procreation was concerned, elves fortunately had magical birth control and abortion that kept unwanted children at a minimum, but this did not stop sex from still being a big deal in elven society, with all the hysterics and absurdities one would witness in human society about it, occurring to varying degrees and varying forms. And when I say elven or elf in this discussion, remember that I'm referring to this particular elven jurisdiction, aka Sandfor's compatriots, since you can't generalize the customs and laws of a whole race of people. But anyway, Sandfor was in real big metaphorical hot water. He was going to go to elf court and be elf tried, and if things didn't work out, he might end up spending a lot of time in elf prison, and even when he got out, he'd have to register as an elf sex offender. His life, for which he had millennia left, was probably ruined so long as he remained in polite elven society, and defined his life by traditional standards of success in polite elven society. Sandfor, a young, fresh 323 himself, still in elf graduate school, was smitten enraptured by a beautiful elven high school student, Fifaha. Fifaha was a cute 6'4", 80-year-old who had silky black hair of a similar shade to the color of Melinda's psychopathic medical student heart. Ah, the bitch. Melinda being the bitch, not Fifaha. Fifaha was sweet and kind and smart, and enjoyed all the time she spent with Sanfor, whom she found exciting and rugged, as though he were a magical lumberjack. Fifaha had a very obnoxious immigrant parents, who came from another elven land far away, where the elves were less jolly or gay, and more industrious on account of dwarven cultural influence. Which wasn't to say that all dwarven cultures were industrious. Many dwarven cultures were industrious, however, being very similar to German and Japanese cultures in the human non-fantasy world. Anyway, her parents made her study all the time, and her life was filled with boredom she needed to make going away by hanging out with someone cool and romantic like Sanfor, who oozed with passion and affection and took her on adventures in his magical Griffin convertible car that was all 1950s greaser badass. They had sex only one time, but bad luck had it that this was the time they would be busted. They were busted by one of Fifaha's parents, her father to be exact. He found them in her room, were overcome with passion. They were engaging in an active sex with Sanfor, inserting his elven penis into Fifaha's elven vagina, in a manner exactly as per how sex was diagrammed in Fifaha's high school health class. This sexual act was technically a rape, according to elven law, but according to the law of the Christian God, who ensures that pots and pans believing in Jesus can live forever in heaven, as well as the law of the atheist deities, who ensure all people live as biological robots and remain utterly non-existent upon death. It was not a rape. It was not a rape because they, Sanfor and Fifaha, both consented to the sexual act beforehand, unambiguously. Yes, Fifaha's consent was not official in the eyes of elven law, because she was not 100 yet. But before anything physical happened, even so much as touch, they both had a dialogue wherein they gave mutual permission for the other to proceed as such. This was good enough for the other laws. Fifaha, it is my stated intention to engage in a sexual act with you that will involve my fluids and genitalia, as you might imagine from your high school health class. I only wish to proceed if you give me your glorious consent to proceed, and then caress you and touch you and penetrate you and all that, said Sanfor with all the passion in his metaphorical heart. It is my glory, my honor, my truth to hereby request for your consent, and I shall with utmost honor respect and abide by your wish. Fifaha then smiled and stated, I hereby give you my consent to a sexual act, per what it entails in terms of the fluids and touch and whatnot within reason, and let all the spirits and gods know that we are hereby agreeing to the sexual act we intend to engage in. So you agree to this, and I agree, and we are both assuming reasonable touch governed by this agreement towards our stated mutual goal of intercourse. And naturally, either of us can rescind our consent whenever we like and pause the act, said Sanfor. Indeed, said Fifaha, as she started to remove her elven tunic to reveal her honey-filled, supple, cuddly breasts that were so large it was possibly a sign she could be at risk for elven breast cancer in the next millennium or two, since all that honey-producing mammary tissue could contain cells that could mutate. Elven magical chemotherapy was thankfully not nearly as brutal as human scientific chemotherapy. If you didn't already get what I was going for, honey was like breast milk for elves. I'm giving them this absurd anatomical trait to imply that they're mystical and silly creatures and all that, though perhaps all I'm doing is making myself sound sillier and more ridiculous as I narrate. Sanfor and Fifaha both said in unison, while holding hands and dancing around in a swirl of romantic magic. This indeed is my indeed from us both. We are on the same page. True consent is upon us, if not legally, then at least in the eyes of the spirits and gods. We are consented. Thank the gods and spirits. We are in agreement about this act of sex being something we both agree to. With the frame-cutting energy of a hip-hop music video, their dancing and hand-holding inevitably progressed and pulsed into sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse of the most mundane sort described in textbooks. But sexual intercourse nonetheless, and it was consensual, gloriously consensual per their verbal agreement, the elven gods and spirits, whose law was similar to that of the Christian God and the atheist deities, like to recognize and celebrate consent in a very tangible, magical way, actually, and sent thousands of invisible fairies to Sanfor and Fifaha at that moment to dance around in the air beside them and celebrate the glory of the sex occurring in a manner they did not consider to be rape. To the elven gods and spirits, the consent involved in a sexual act was even more important than the act itself. Consent was sacred and beautiful, and represented the epitome of the amazing, loving ways elves can interact with each other, truly embracing each other's dignity and mutual agreement to physical acts that involve contacting each other's bodies. Sanfor did not know that this was happening around him, that his glory of consensual sex was literally recognized by magical spiritual forces who gave him incredible company, surrounding him with benevolent, loving, invisible fairies who were in their own space-time defying way boogie-woogieing in the amazing, awesome, stupendous, huge, very tremendous way that fairies do. It would be little consolation for him if he knew this, because those fairies had nothing to do with the law of the land, which stated that an elf of his age, 323, could not have sex with an 80-year-old elf on account of the fact that she did not legally have the right to consent to sex. Even though the spirits and gods and fairies recognized with their magic and wisdom that this act was not a rape, but a glorious non-rape worthy of celebration and shimmering rays of sunshine and magical good stuff, society viewed this as rape. As he lied in the prison cell, squirming and tossing and turning in his uncomfortable bed of willow leaves that crumbled and scratched beneath him, per Thanksgiving autumn decomposition, things didn't seem like they could get much worse for Sanfor. As a distraction, a mental escape, he fantasized about Fifaha's beautiful face and longed to get in touch with her again, and then feel her physical touch, surround himself in an ocean of her sweet joy and caressing, aromatic warmth. His life had collapsed around him, and he could only think of that impeccable, sugary pleasure, that pleasure like a decadent pastry, the sweet, addictive pleasure she gave him by her very presence when it was close to his, like when they were cuddling or snuggling or fucking or talking to each other or something. He visualized and imagined touching her ears, her hair, her two elven breasts, each with one nipple that secreted honey when sucked on by an infant per elven breastfeeding. The sweet honey of her breast was an additional metaphor for how sweet her company was to Sanfor. And forgive my misspeaking. "Hey, buddy, hey, quiet, come here," whispered a scraggly old elf in the cell next to Sanfor's, who was pressed up against the bars that separated their non-bird cages. "I want to talk to you for a bit." "What?" asked Sanfor. "Come here, not too loud," he whispered. Sanfor slid over to the bars and replied, "What? You ever heard of zombification?"